Aluna. So Anya read Felicity's article in the Irish Times after the Irish premiere in the Queen in the Basket Centre in County Kerry. And it spoke to Anya's heart, and she was intrigued by the story of the Kogi, and she sent me the article, and we said, can we bring it to Dublin? So we contacted Jean-Paul, and we've been back and forth ever since to organise the screening tonight. So we're really excited to have the director and producer Alan Herrera, and we're excited to have Jean-Paul, the associate producer, and they're going to say a few words. But first of all, the idea that what really appeals to us is this idea of building a bridge between all of the different people who this film will speak to. So we have all of those with this common sense of we need to do something to change the trajectory that we're on, which is overconsumption and which is leading us away from being sustainable. So we have the artists, we have the scientists, we have the storytellers, we have everybody talking the same common language, but it's true in different means, and we feel that Aluna speaks to all of us, and I hope that through this film that it will bring all of those actors to the table so we can work together towards really building the more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. So to welcome Alan Herrera, the director.
And it's wonderful that you have given me an excuse to come back to Dublin. Thank you very much indeed. So many people here. There's probably one or two empty chairs out there because I did meet various people who were wandering around looking for this space outside and failing to find it, and they're probably still strolling around asking everybody where to years will come. The origin of this film back in the late 80s, when the BBC said, I was working for the BBC making a film in Colombia, or a bit of a film in Colombia, and they said, look, this city has turned up in the jungle, can you go and investigate it and see if there is a film to be made? And that was how I encountered the Kogi people, because there were other cities which were not archaeological sites, but were actually still occupied and living the life that they had been living in 1600, hidden. And they're very secretive people, and I got a message to them saying, if you want to speak to the world, I can help you. But I didn't go directly there. And I got a message back saying, we're waiting to work with you. Come. And that started my relationship with the Kogi. And the film that we made then, which is called From the Heart of the World, The Elder Brother's Warning, a 90-minute documentary made by indigenous people in this hidden location in Colombia, was broadcast by the BBC on both BBC Two and BBC One, and had a pretty enormous impact. That was then. To get the BBC or any other television channel to show such a film now is pretty hard, to put it mildly. They were saying, we need to speak to you because you guys are destroying the planet. You obviously don't know, so we have to tell you. Then I got called back 4 years ago, when they said, what went wrong? We told you you're destroying the world. We thought that you would stop. But you haven't. We did it wrong. How did we do it? And out of that came this film. Having completed it, we found that it was very, very hard to get anybody to show it. Really hard. And we got a big international distributor, very enthusiastic about the film, but that hasn't got it onto television screens or into mainstream cinemas. So now it is being released later this year on iTunes, Netflix, will be available. And what has to happen is that people need to create an audience for this film, need to encourage other people to see it and talk about it and make a noise about it, and then the broadcasters will realize that the audience that they do not think exists does exist, because this is important. It needs to be, what they're saying needs to be seen, needs to be heard, and needs to be responded to. And in this very, very narrow vision that all broadcasters now have of the population, somehow we've got to crack that open. Because if we carry on like this, the Coggy, I think, is probably quite right in saying we're screwed. Okay, have a look at the film and let's talk about it afterwards. Thanks.
Subtitles, I hope it doesn't detract too much from your enjoyment of the film. And Alan and Jean-Paul, I'd like to congratulate you and your film crew on the beautiful, inspirational, insightful film that you have created with the Cody Mamas. Alan spoke in his introduction about talking about the film, and sometimes the most important thing about films like Aluna is the discussions and the talks that happen around them. So what I'd like to do now is perhaps open the floor for a sharing and discussion of thoughts or emotions that were evoked through the film. I'm sure if any of us, I know that it's given me a lot of food for thought. If anybody has any questions that arose while watching the film, please, I invite you now to put them to Alan and Jean-Paul. And I'd also like to invite Gary Whitedeer, a First Nation Choctaw Indian, to join us up here as well.
It would be most appropriate for Gary to start off, because I don't know whether he finds the film has any particular relevance to his understanding of speaker's understanding.
Oh, well. I guess I can comment about that. My name is, well, last name now, Whitedeer. Gary Whitedeer from Oklahoma. I'm a Choctaw Indian, and I was very touched and moved by this. It's just well done. That's the best cowboy Indian movie I ever saw. But it was great. It was brilliant. It's very touching. But I understood it most of all, and on a tribal level, it makes sense to me. The teachings that I heard growing up, the way we put those teachings into practice, and when we look at the world from that older tradition that, still has not quite faded yet. It's understandable to me to see this because I can put it inside that model, and I can see it very well. So I'll just say a little bit maybe, and I'll leave the rest of this space open to all of you and to the great director and Jean-Paul here. But what we say, my people say, in the English language, you could say that everything begins with balance. And there's 4 cardinal things that everything rests on. So this is why this particular film was understandable to me. So if you have balance as your first condition, then the next condition that follows in my teaching, my tribal teachings, the Choctaw people, where I say then the next thing that follows is order. And if things are in order, in our understanding, the next condition that follows from that is harmony. And then, if you have those 3 conditions, the one following the other, the final 4th condition is peace. There's a peace there. You could say, peace of mind, or peace in human affairs, affairs with our Mother Earth. But they also say that if you don't start with balance, if you start with imbalance, then what we have been told or believed is that the next condition that flows from that isn't order, but it's disorder. And then if you have disorder, if things are in disorder, what my people older than me explain, then instead of harmony, you have disharmony. So those three conditions, imbalance and disorder, disharmony, that leads to a final condition as well. And that final condition, they say, is chaos. So that's where you arrive at chaos from. So I just wanted to say that a little bit to you, that we do have teachings as well that I can collaborate or corroborate what was said on that film. It's understandable. And that this is our mother, all of us here, and we're all related in that way. So I just wanted to say that a little bit. So thanks for asking me.
Thank you, and I believe that kind of endorsement is very important. I think that the Kogi are not just speaking out of their own knowledge and for themselves, but speaking out of a huge human knowledge, a knowledge of First Peoples of many, many places.
That's right.
And they speak in a way for everyone who comes with that knowledge. If you think they speak well, that's what matters.
That's right.
Thank you.
Are there any questions from the audience for Alan, Jean-Paul, or Gary? Please share.
How is the film being seen locally in Colombia?
How's it been received in Colombia? The answer is that so far it has not been seen in Colombia, but Colombian Cinema, this is the one country in the world where there is an intention clearly stated by a major cinema chain to put it into cinemas. And we are now setting up the process of putting it onto in Cine Colombia, the Colombian Cinema. What I love about Colombian Cinema's approach to it is they have not said, we think this film is really important because of its profound wisdom and its important teachings. What they said is, we think this film is absolutely marvelous because we have never seen Colombia looking so beautiful, and people will want to come and see it because they can see that their country looks so beautiful. And I think that's great, because that is going to draw in a much broader audience than people who would come to be done good. And I don't want people to come because they feel they're going to be done good. I want people to come because they believe and will really enjoy the experience of sitting there. And if Colombians come and see this film and go out of the cinema feeling prouder of being Colombians, wouldn't that be great? And that helps to look after the world. So I'm very enthusiastic about that. And the plan, I understand, is to do a release later this year. And they want to use it as a basis for education in schools, which I think is exactly where it should be. And personally, I want to try and encourage the Kogi, if they're willing to engage with the world to that extent, to take on the burden of engaging with Colombian children. Because actually, as you say, balance is what matters. This is a world where, particularly in a country like Colombia, children find it difficult to think and understand the world in a balanced way, and contact with the indigenous people is a very good way for them to learn another way of thinking and understanding that will help them grow up to be better caretakers of themselves and the world. So I'm keen on that.
Do you have any other questions?
Yeah, I hope that sounds silly, but I mean, it's all seems going along with trade.
Yeah.
But in terms of maybe just practical things, I mean, big garden go to fall. Presumably, is a trade left there?
It's a symbol.
It's a symbol, yeah.
And it's not only a symbol.
Yeah.
The act of doing what they're doing is also actually an offering. It is a ritual process. So I think to expect it to remain there in permanence No, it can't do that. What it's doing is making something manifest which is invisible, and they're saying, see, you can see where this invisible thing is. But it's also the act of them doing it as this process of an offering, which is, offerings are something I find very hard to understand. Every indigenous and indeed religious culture has this notion of making offerings. And I'm not a religious person, and I don't share this perception. But the idea, and obviously what it comes out of and is connected to, is the idea that of payment. In fact, the word is pagamento, or payment, and that has to do with the notion that everything you take, you have to repay for. There has to be an exchange all the time. And the business of making an offering is making an exchange. You give and you receive, or you take and you give. And that, I think, is what is going on here. So it's, you shouldn't see it as being leaving a piece of gold for other people to come and possibly steal. And in fact,
because I know that for them it was an actual, to them it says that there is a real connection, and
there is a real connection, but actually the black line, which is what is being shown with the gold line, is the real line. And the gold line, the gold line is just for show, disappears. But the black line is permanent and there all the time.
Yeah.
Maybe it was like a diagram in a way.
You're absolutely right. Yes, it is. Thank you. Yes.
I imagine that, how long altogether was it in the filming? I imagine it had a huge impact on your life and those who were with you.
Well, I've been involved with them since 1988. So.
But what happens to you when you come back into civilization, or what we think is civilization, and after being so in touch when you're with the indigenous people, like that sense of earth is so important, and then you come back.
Yes, it's a very complicated, difficult question. There's a number of different elements to it.
Yes.
One is, of course, there are quite a lot of outsiders who engage with the Kogi, Westerners, as we call them. I don't know why we call them Westerners. I live further east than the Kogi do, but we call them Westerners. Most of the people who go and engage with the Kogi actually have this desire to turn into them.
Yes.
And so they try to be like a Kogi, to live like a Kogi, to be part of the Kogi world, and to be endorsed by the Kogi, and to be told by the Kogi, we accept you, you are almost one of us. And I have not only no desire to do that, absolutely no desire, but if I did it, I'd be completely useless to them. My function in their world is to be an outsider, is to be a person who comes with other and different values and an understanding of our world, and they have to teach me to understand what I need to, and no more than I need to, in order to carry what they want to say back to here. So anything I do that might turn me into a value me and make me pointless as far as they're concerned. Also, I do rather tend to take the view that I'm there to do a job. And when you have a plumber or an electrician come into your home, you really don't want him to say, you have a really beautiful home here, your way of life is so lovely, I think I'd like to come and live with you for 6 months. Why would you laugh? And nor do the Kogi want that. So, but there is another level, that when I realized the first time I went up there and spent time with them and then came back again, I had had an experience there that I'd never had elsewhere, which was that I had begun my experience of the world was much more intense. I was awake. I was experiencing everything going on around me. I'd never been anywhere before where that happened. Everything had meaning. Literally everything had meaning. Everything that happened all the time, I could understand that I should perceive it as part of a connected whole, which meant that everything had interconnected significance. Didn't matter what it was. It was all part of a single narrative. Every movement of every bird, every plant, everything that happened to me, everything that happened to the people around me, was all a coherent narrative that I was experiencing. I'd never had that sensation before. And when I came back down the mountain, I was completely thrown, because I had thought the reason we live the way we do down here is because it's a more comfortable and enjoyable life than their life up in the mountain, primitive, no running water, no roads, just cooking on an open fire. And then I realized when I came back down that actually I was very, very much more uncomfortable here than them. The air tastes horrible. The water is awful. The furniture we sit on hurts. and I realized that the only reason that I thought that any of this was acceptable was because I had shut down my senses to the point where I could tolerate it and didn't notice it and didn't mind it. The noise around us is terrible, awful, roaring, incoherent cacophony. And so I found it took me about a month to shut down my sensory perceptions to the point that I could feel comfortable again. And in doing that, I of course lost the sense of understanding of all the things that were going on around me, because I had to stop perceiving them. And that horrible, colossal lesson, that's the thing I learned and that changed me. And each time I go back there, this becomes the problem. I don't want to live there. I don't want to be a copy. I want to live here. I want to be me. I want to be part of our world. But I also want to enjoy being part of our world. And I now am very aware of how profoundly unpleasant physically our world actually is. Does this make any sense?
Yeah, I think so too. I guess we get desensitized. I lived in Dublin about 3 years and just moved to Donegal, not too far from Tory Island in Welltech. And I kept falling asleep for the first 2 days because the air was really fresh. So I understood then, geez, I've been reading all that and hearing all that. So I had to learn again, what it was to take fresh air all the time.
I also found that simply living in a closed-in, boxed-in space like this, where the air is dead and inert, and drinking water that's come through a pipe, so I've suffered in that way. This is something I hadn't been aware of before. Suddenly you become aware of it.
Alan, can I make a comment? I was at the Glasgow Centre screening in Dulwich, which was the first time that the film was screened in Ireland. And one of the things that I found fascinating afterwards was listening to the older people in the Glasgow talking about the film, because half of them thought it was a load of rhumation. There was, what on earth is it about? And you can't live like that, and we all have to get into the future. But after a while, you heard the older people talking. And one thing that was said that I found fascinating was that some of the older men who used to fish round the Blaskets remembered, and my point is that this is in living memory in Ireland. They remembered that when the islanders used to come out of the island to go fishing in the Blasket Sound in bad weather, at least when they were afraid it was going to be bad weather, they would come out and they threw a little piece of tobacco into the water, into the sea, as they were going past a rock which they called Choctaw. And I asked them what that had to do with the film, and also what the hell was all that about. And they said it was payment. It was payment because they were going to take fish out of the sea. And they had always done it. And that everybody up and down the west coast had always done it. And then an older man said to me, sure, everybody in these waters had always done it. It's just that I was raised in Dublin, I now live back there. I never knew anything about that. So much has been forgotten, and it's so recent. So I think what I'm trying to say is these are not people over the other side of the world living up the top of the mountain that don't relate to us in any way. All over the world, our grandfathers and great-grandfathers understood more than we do. And so we can get back in touch actually quite quickly. It's there. We just have to reach out for it.
I'd like to say something really quick. Back in about 1996, they had me do that at the Shannon Pot with tobacco in close to the water.
Yeah.
And I think these places, I guess in English, we would relate to them sort of like energy lines. They're all throughout the world, throughout the earth. They're here in Ireland as well. There's those places where everything connects up and things begin and things are nurtured and they flow from and you have them. And the idea about payment, you even have that too if you go to a holy well.
Yes, absolutely.
That was an example that just came to me. So I think we have that commonality. I think we do. We all do. And I just think it was a brilliant message, brilliant film. And I'm very honored to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Very honored to have you.
Yeah, and can I just ask, I think this is probably leading on from what you've just talked about, but the film was really focused on how we can change, we can lobby, I suppose, the state to change, to keep those connections. So, but how is it possible to, you said it may be very uncomfortable when you came down from the mountain and to realise in this world what the different values, but how can you implement it personally? How can you implement those values in a personal way? In a day-to-day sense, how can we do that?
I'm not. I don't have an agenda to offer people, and the Coggy don't take it on themselves to tell us how to live. And when this question gets asked to them, they say that's up to you to make your decision about how you are going to do something, but you have to do something. The only thing I can say, which I think, is that we have to be more conscious of the world around us and of the significance of what we do. Connectedness. The theme of the film is that everything is connected. That, strangely, is something that it seems quite hard for us to understand. It does seem odd. I mean, the Coggy have real trouble understanding how we don't see the connections between things. And that to them, it seems very strange that we are people who will throw a brick up in the air and then be very surprised when it falls on our heads. Because it does seem obvious to them.
Sorry, I think people need to Coggy really probably on the plan. They have to wear shoes. They're disconnected with the earth. That's one of the problems. We wear shoes. We don't spend fully more of our feet in the earth. And that's how we get connection back. Everybody on a daily basis is actually coming across, and that's how we get back in touch with the earth.
One of the things I've noticed is that in the English language you have me and me. And if you're using the word Western, I guess you could say Western cultures, that's not a collective culture, that's a me culture, generally. So if you don't have a connection between yourselves as people, you're not going to see it with anything else. But if I come out of a communal culture, we still have the we. And so we know that if one thing happens to one of us that happens to someone else, we reckon our success is tied to others around us and their successes, and we're all going somewhere together. Then we feel connected to one another. We're not individuals. So that's a framework to me. That's a communal framework. It has a place to go, a place to be understood. But I think the me culture doesn't have a framework to understand it. It's just rampant. I remember my father asked a question one time. He said, "How much is enough?" And I think the way you understand that question, the way you answer it, depends on if you're from a me culture or a we culture, or you think like a me person or a we person. I would myself, no one's asking me, but I would recommend or suggest that we all start thinking like the we persons. in a community or a communal sense. And I think it's much easier then to find that connection first with ourselves and then with others. We still have it back home.
I think what struck me as well was family. Children in the film, the fact that, women were honored and think positive when the child is born. Family is extremely important, and the quietness of it, the sense of there's we, but all connected and not battling or anything like that. I think that's back to the older people. I think that's that connection between older, each generation connecting with the we.
Have the grandparents there as well.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. They're very much together, yes.
Would you have any fear that the film might draw tourists looking at the film?
That is an issue for the Kogi. And with the first film, when we discussed making the first film, what I understood to be the risks of this going out on worldwide television, and that people would want to be interested in them and would try to come and it would draw attention to them. And I said, and for that reason, I would recommend that you don't do it. On the other hand, there may be reasons why you think you should do it. Perhaps these are some of the reasons. They make that decision for themselves. They're grown-ups. And they're well aware of what the issues are. And I don't think that it is my role to become their protective father figure and look after them and say, no, you can't actually say what you want to say or do what you want to do. They're very careful in the way they control information. And they let out what they want to let out. Nothing happens in the film, and nothing happened in the first film. That was not pre-planned by them. They're completely in charge of production. And I don't know if you noticed, you probably did, at the end of the film, Mama Shibalata, when he takes his clothes off and he goes into the water. This simple man from a culture where there is no literacy and no wheel. The way he arranged his body for the camera, and at one point he looks to the camera to check on what it is that it's seeing, and then puts himself into the water. He knows exactly what the image is that we are going to receive, and they all do all the way through the film. They know what they're doing, and I think they are better at it and cleverer at it than I am. So I defer to them on this kind of thing. I would add one other thing on what we do and what we should do. Felicity has spoken about a knowledge of how to relate to the earth that was very widespread and still exists. In England, I tend to talk to people when this question comes up about how you do have knowledge of how to relate to nature because you take care of gardens and you understand gardening. And all the values of an English garden and the English gardener are closer, far closer to the indigenous perspective and the Kogi perspective than they are to a material exploitative perspective. A garden is not there for profit, and everything is understood to be connected. And what you do in one area of the garden, you know will affect the other areas, and you think very carefully about how it will affect them. And all that relates to actually quite a profound sense of understanding of the world that people actually have, but do not feel empowered to speak about. In fact, they feel that they have to be very careful what they say, because they will be regarded as flaky. And the vast majority of the population actually have what I think would be regarded as a flaky perspective on the world, which they don't reveal openly, and they put up a front of the kind of material rationalism which they think they are supposed to have rather than what they actually receive. And I think it is very important and perhaps absolutely essential to us that we use and accept things like Aluna as empowering us to talk about the world in a way that we believe is true. And that really matters. That we stop faking it and become truthful. And I think that could make an enormous difference without even necessarily having to take your shoes off.
Anybody else would like to share their thoughts?
Explains that, well, obviously you have this precipitation that this uptake from the oceans and pushes it across mountains, and I just thought, Christ, I mean, look at this, this is rocket science, but yes, this uneducated person from the mountains is able to explain it. One question I do have regarding their beliefs, I presume they're a very contained society. They look very contained within where they live. How accepting or aware are they of the overwhelming scientific beliefs regarding deforestation and fossil fuel exploitation and things like how aware and accepting are they of those beliefs, and how does it entwine with their teachings and understandings?
I'm not quite sure what you're
As
asking.
in, do they accept, are they aware of the overwhelming teachings and papers and publications regarding the consequences of fossil fuel use?
Right. Do they know about the whole global warming thing?
Yeah, exactly. And do they accept it, and does it tie in with kind of what they're trying to say as well?
They know about it, to the extent that after the film was made, two of the scientists in the film took Mama Shibalata and some of the Kogi to the Rio +20 conference to make a presentation there, which was a significant thing to do. And representatives of the Colombian government were there and responded very positively to the Kogi's presentation. I think they have grown used in the period between the two films to much more contact with the outside world, and particularly with political voices from the outside world and power voices from the outside world. And they have grown accustomed to recognizing that what those voices say is never to be trusted. That whatever they hear being said is not to be relied on. And that therefore, if you have even great conventions of scientists saying, we have to stop doing this, that does not mean that anything will be done at all. It is just a noise that we make. And what they have to do is find a way of getting beyond that noise.
So there was a piece in the film that showed ground that had been ruined, and I didn't quite catch what exactly. I couldn't read in the bottom how the Kogi's brought this back.
Brought it back, yes, it's a colossal amount of forest regeneration.
They had done that themselves.
They've done that themselves.
And are the Colombians not absolutely agog? I mean, that should have everybody going, oh my God.
The Colombians are not agog. However, they have mapped the growth of new forest. And there are some very good maps online showing that something like 70% of the deforestation in the Kogi area it's been recovered.
And they just did that with their, again, simplistic ways.
They're simplistic, where they're enormously sophisticated.
I know, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
And the way they literally wove Mother Nature back.
Yes, that's right, yes. I'm very, I don't want to get involved in giving lessons on how the Kogi regenerate forests.
No, yes, I know.
Because there you are into something which very quickly becomes totally flaky.
Okay. But indeed, but if our heads were screwed on in any right way, that's where everybody should be looking.
Yes, and they can do it. That's the thing.
Yeah.
They can do it, and it's not just bringing back the forest. They bring back the river. They bring back the animals. It all slowly, 20 years, but it happens.
That's very
Our contribution, I have to say, outside there, we've got some discs of the first film. We're not allowed to sell them because they're BBC copyright. So we give them away to people who make substantial donations to the Tairona Heritage Trust. The Tairona Heritage Trust was set up after the first film to support the Kogi. We also have a book that I wrote about the first film. Same thing. The Tairona Heritage Trust when the Kogi decide that they want to buy a piece of land, one of the places they can come to is the trust. They pick the land, they negotiate the land, they do everything. And then we say, okay, we will raise that much money, and we provide the money for it to be paid for. The land that you saw being reforested, the trust paid for. That's our contribution. That's what we can do. We can help them recover the land from the colonos, the people who strip all the vegetation for it, spend a few years cattle grazing, destroy it, the top surface blows away, everything dies. And actually the colonos, and then they start growing cocaine. And they're desperate to get out, actually. I mean, the guys who are growing the cocaine really do want an escape route. So the money, the Kogi negotiate a sale of the land, we help them to buy it. And that particular river valley, which I know quite well, I knew it when it was cocaine farms, I knew it was when it was infested with gorillas, and I know it now. And I'm proud to say that the Tairona Heritage Trust actually produced the money and helped, well, made possible the purchase of that territory, but we wouldn't have known what to do with it. Only the Kogi would know that.
Yeah. To what extent you've been exposed to their own wisdom, or I would say technology? For example, the Kogis are quite well known for their initiations into darkness or this sort of stuff. Did you get an insight into their own wisdom and how they work with nature? Or?
Terribly difficult. I learned enough over the years to be able to invent the way in which the Kogi think and invent a Kogi philosophy for them, which I then inhabit when I'm away from the Sierra. One of the reasons why I feel it necessary to go back once a year, if I can, is to be reminded that that's something I invented. And it's not actually the truth. And that their way of understanding the world is so alien to mine that there is no possibility of my being able to enter into it. And this is essentially language related. They have a language which is so different from ours, mine, a European type language. There are some languages like this in North America as well, I've heard. Kogi language has no nouns. It does not have words for individual physical objects, separate from other physical objects. So it's another way of understanding reality. So, for example...
I was going to say, give me an example.
I'll give you some examples, certainly. The words that is used for the mountain, that's made up of the words go, na, win, dwa. Go, each of those is a syllable, which is a word which has multiple meanings. Go, one of its meanings is the first movement, the first light before dawn. The na, the first movement of a baby in its mother's stomach, is one of its meanings. Win, a sense of anticipation. Dwa, the stars, the Milky Way, sperm, shells, bacteria, small living creatures. What does Gonawin Dua? It's a book about the imminence of life, about the anticipation and the coming of all life. That is the name of the mountain. To think like a Kogi, you have to speak Kogi. In order to speak Kogi, I think you have not to speak my kind of language.
So So in the film, I went from Kogi to Spanish to English.
Yes. And the process of translation went on. In Colombia and in London, and I brought a Kogi to London, and we did the 4th translation with a Kogi in London, and then he took it back, and then they revised it again. And it was never a translation. It was always an interpretation. What you have is an interpretation which the Kogi feel we will understand that represents what they're saying. It's not the same as a translation. You can't map one language on the other.
Yeah, I thought you handled that very, very well, actually, because even if you look at the subtitles, how they express, say, the connection between, the sea and the mountains, and then you look at that, that scientist from Oxford, the guy from Zoetrope, and he explains it, but he kind of explains it in our language, and you can make the connections, but you see that it's more kind of, I suppose, I don't know, you put it in the aesthetic or something, in a different way of expressing it.
Well, because they see all nature as part of a living being, a living body.
Yeah.
So it's a different way. Actually, when Alex was there and talking, when they were at the side of that dead lake where everything had died, at that point I said, look, let's stop translating, because I don't think the translation between you is helping at all. Just talk to each other. And they talked to each other in their own languages, and there was no doubt they understood each other perfectly in terms of what they were trying to communicate.
Yeah.
When we then got the translations, what became obvious was that the metaphors that they used are completely different.
Yeah.
So the metaphors were actually getting in the way of communication.
Yeah.
Body language was enough. Tone of voice, way of speaking,
Yeah.
conveyed everything.
Yeah.
Are there any further? Yes, at the back there.
When he was in the observatory and he saw the stars that you couldn't see from the naked eye, could you explain a bit more how maybe you might have interpreted that?
How does a Kogi recognize a star that cannot be seen from Earth and say, you can't see this from Earth, but I know what it is, and pick out the only star in the picture, unerringly and in a flash? No. How could I? I can invent things. Alan, of course, thought that this showed something really significant, was what he said.
That's it?
Yes.
Statement.
That was what he published.
Question from this side of the room. It's more of a comment, really. I saw the first film as well, and there was a lot more in the first film about the period of translation, which you haven't really mentioned.
Oh, it was?
It was in the film, but nobody's sort of mentioned it now. But to me, that's hugely significant in terms of this incredible sense of centeredness and knowing that they're able to hold, regardless of who they're talking to in the film, regardless of the questions come. And I was struck by the comment from the astronomer, which was just that this man just doesn't need to be told anything, and he's just holding his ground. And I just think that I want to go back to the first film again and sort of reintroduce myself to that piece, because I think it's a big part of the story in terms of their knowing and understanding.
Yeah, and the experience in darkness, I think, a large part of its function, or one part of its function, is I think the Kogi perception of us and of most human beings is that we are so overwhelmed by the physical experience of the world around us, by the sight of the world around us from infancy, that the present moment becomes the whole of reality, that what we perceive becomes the whole of reality. And by bringing up some children in the dark, those children don't have that. They're not overwhelmed by what's out there. And so when they do experience what's out there, they see it embedded in another context. And that makes their understanding of the world totally different from ours.
And would you be able to tell the difference between the people that you met who had gone through that initiation and the ones that hadn't, or did they all go through it?
They certainly didn't all go through it. And yes, I can tell the difference, but the difference is not what you would think it was. So, Mama Manuel, who is the delightful young brother, who would be very glamorous if he had all his teeth, and he did go through it, and Mama Chipolata did not. So, we look for the wrong things.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I just see so many parallelisms between like what we've just seen and my own life experience and the people that I've attracted recently, you know, that the going into darkness just brings into me like so much parallelism with meditation and consciousness, and that if we're here now watching this and talking about it and experiencing this the way we are, it's just going to ripple. And as we go out today to our partners or loved ones or family, and we take this in to ourselves, it will ripple. It will ripple in the little things that the way we talk to each other, the way we eat, the choices of the products we buy, if we go to, you know, there's so many, every moment of the day, we act and we speak, and that's, you know, that's life. That's us taking responsibility and being in this world. So,
and that's why it's going to be so important to encourage other people to see the film. And I ask you, please, from time to time, well, either leave us with a name and address, an email address, or check the website from time to time so that you understand, you know when it's going to be coming out on iPlayer and on Netflix and on other Xbox. It's going to happen on all these sources so that you can encourage other people to see it. That's all that needs to happen. If we can get 50 million people to see it, that wouldn't do any harm.
There's one more question in the back here.
How unique do you think the Kogi are as a tribe who want to take it upon themselves to influence our behaviour?
There are certain features of the Kogi which I think are unique. Not their belief system or their understanding of the world. They've simply looked after that very well. I think what is unique is the extent to which they have preserved their separateness. The fact that all their leaders speak no Western language. The fact that if you're a Kogi and you speak Spanish, you cease to be quite the same kind of Kogi. It's not possible. If you don't have any Spanish, if you can live entirely within that mental world, that's significant. The other thing that I think is possibly unique, certainly extremely unusual, is that they are proactive, not reactive. My experience, which is very limited, of indigenous people living in tribal situations, is that they do not take a long view of their situation. They react to what happens. For example, I spent a while living with the Shibibo people in Peru, who wanted to meet me because of the first film I'd done with the Kogi, and they wanted to explore doing something themselves. And the Shibibo said that they were really very keen on development because they would really like electricity and how that would change their lives. And I explained that there was a problem. I could understand why they liked electricity, but they had to think about the fact that with electricity would come an electricity bill. They would have to pay money for electricity. And in order to acquire money, they would have to send some of their sons 4 days up the river to the nearest town where they would work to get money. And their children would turn into Peruvians, which is a very bad word in the Shipibo language. And that it was only by that process that they would have the money to pay for electricity. And as I said, think about it, how are you going to deal with that? How are you going to approach it? Because there are ways, there are things you can negotiate. You have great knowledge. We could work out a way for you to use that knowledge to produce money rather than send your children up the river. For example, you could work with a medical company. You have great knowledge of medical plants. But the Shipibo were not capable of setting out a plan for how to develop something. In fact, their whole culture was totally against the idea of one person telling another person what to do. So they couldn't construct that kind of project. The Kogi, on the other hand, have a culture which is very strong on one person telling another person what to do. It's what mamas do all the time. So the notion of a coherent leadership, sitting down and planning. I mean, I've sat in meetings with the Kogi where, the basis of today's discussion, meeting of mamas, who meet regularly to have political seances. Alan, we want you to join in today's discussion because what we want to know is what is your opinion of globalization? Those kind of issues. They hear about things, you know? So they heard about cloning, genetic engineering. What can I tell them about cloning and genetic engineering and how should they be reacting to it? And similarly with globalization. What position do they need to take? What does it mean? What does it signify? How are they going to deal with the issues when they come to them? There are mining companies who are interested in their territory. So they devise a plan ahead of the mining companies coming to acquire the intellectual capital that gives them knowledge of the territory that mining companies would want to get hold of so that they are the owners of that information. And they map it. I've never come across indigenous people who behave like that, or tribal indigenous people. I think it's very unusual. And this is why they survive. Because they are proactive, and I personally always feel politically and intellectually inferior to the mothers. They know what they're doing. They are profound and swift thinkers. And I don't understand when they talk to me. Usually it takes me 3 months to understand what it is that they've actually said. I'm quite serious. But that's, so I find them strange.
What's the population?
Now I would say just over 20,000.
I have something, just an observance from back home. If this were an audience of people from my tribal communities, they would be focusing on the message. It's just a cultural difference. If these people are wanting to tell us something about it, and we wouldn't be focusing on the message. I think it's just a difference. It's cultural difference. It's just an observation. So I've heard a lot more questions about the messengers than the actual message.
Well, what's interesting on that point is when we've shown the film to an older audience of adults, the discussion is quite often like this. However, when we show the film to children, I mean, children can't get enough of it. They innately connect with it in a very different way, and I think part of our job is to encourage them to continue to do that. I mean, a friend of mine showed a film that he made about sharks, saving sharks in the world. And during the process of making the film, he kind of had an inner realization that wasn't actually the sharks that needed saving. I mean, he did a great job with trying to save the sharks through this film, but he realised that it was civilization that was in danger rather than the sharks. And so he set about making another film, and in the process of that, and so what the school teacher had done was she'd shown his first film to the children about saving the sharks, how there was a huge illegal shark fishing industry. And the children watched this and thought, yeah, this guy's right, you know. Well, what are we doing about this in Papua New Guinea? So the classroom of children of 9-year-olds got together and decided to write a letter to their politician, which they did. The politician received the letter on his desk. He said, actually, what these children are saying is right. And as a result of that film, then the letter from the children, they changed the entire fishing policy of Papua New Guinea. You know, and so I think that's an important part of the, you know, the discussion. What's important to me about what Aluna can potentially do.
Before people go, there are other films out there. Jean-Paul, could you look after selling them? The books that people want to buy a copy. So do take something away if you want to.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So what the school teacher had done was she'd shown his first film to the children about saving the sharks, how there was a huge illegal shark fishing industry. And the children watched this and thought, yeah, this guy's right, you know. Well, what are we doing about this in Papua New Guinea? So the classroom of children of 9-year-olds got together and decided to write a letter to their politician, which they did. The politician received the letter on his desk. He said, actually, what these children are saying is right. And as a result of that film, then the letter from the children, they changed the entire fishing policy of Papua New Guinea. You know, and so I think that's an important part of the, you know, the discussion. What's important to me about what Aluna can potentially do.
Before people go, there are other films out there. Jean-Paul, could you look after selling them? The books that people want to buy a copy. So do take something away if you want to.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Also